like the circus? Do you like the circus? Do you like the circus?
Enter one, enter all. The circus of the bizarre.
Okay, I actually really think that the real circus is out on our roadways, on our nation's highways and byways. That's where I really think it is. Here's why. About a week to 10 days ago, I witnessed some road rage. I don't know if you've ever witnessed road rage before, but I was driving home and I came to a stoplight. And I was just sitting there, not looking at my phone, and there was light turns green on the other side, and we're used to, like, when the light turns green, what do? We put our foot on the gas pedal, and we start going through the intersection. So I'm not really paying any attention or anything, and then all of a sudden I hear all of these car horns. And I look, and the cross traffic, the lead guy, this guy in this truck, is creeping through the intersection, and he's got his left arm out of his window, and he's waving it fairly violently with one of his fingers was in the air, and he was waving it at the people behind them, creeping through the intersection. I think, wow, he must have had some sort of negative interaction with people behind him. And, normally you'll see a little thing like that, and then they'll just speed on. No, he creeps all the way through the intersection like that, makes everybody very angry. And I'm always a little bit unnerved when I see stuff like that because I am not a perfect driver. I am no expert. I'm sure you all are probably really great drivers and you never make a mistake and all of that. You never get upset when you drive, I'm sure. But I am not that way. Occasionally I will make a mistake. And sometimes when we make a mistake, people will kind of get mad at us, right? And then other times, like when people cut us off, we take it kind of personally. Like we think like they targeted us from like a mile back and said, that's the guy I'm going to get in front of. You watch this. And so we sit here and go, dude, you picked me out just to pull in front of me. So we kind of take it personally, and then there's people like me who, when like I get the finger or something like that, I feel bad. Like I feel like if you just knew me a little bit better, maybe you would take the finger back. So I came up with this idea. You sound like you're open to it, so I'm going to try it out on you. So here's what I think we should do. I think we should install what I like to call explain lanes. About every mile or so, it'd be like these diagonal lanes you could pull off. There would be like a sign for it, like a heart, that said explain lanes. And you would pull off there. We could have like a signal, like 2 swipes of your windshield wipers, and you pull into the explain lane, okay? Now, here's how it would work. Let's say that I cut somebody off. 2 swipes of the windshield wiper, we're going to the explain lane. Oh, and I would enhance them too. They would be really nice places to go. It would be like a shade tree and a couple of those Cracker Barrel rocking chairs we could put there, and some of that really sweet Chick-fil-A lemonade would be really good. The nice enhancement there. Okay, so let's say I cut somebody off. So we go into the explain lane, person gets out of the car, they're irritated. Like, hey man, hey, yeah, I know I cut you off. I'm really sorry. Look, sit down here. Let me pour you some lemonade. Let me tell you what happened. My name's Dan, and so here's what it was. So I'm a pastor, and there's somebody who's sick in the hospital, and I was just driving along, kind of zoning out, and I needed to get in the left lane to turn left on a Dam Neck, and I cut you off, man, and I'm just really sorry I did that. And you would be able to see sort of that anger just leave the person. And then they would say like, oh, you didn't mean to cut me off. You're just trying to get somewhere, and you kind of zoned out. I'd be like, yeah, you get me. And then as an enhancement, this is kind of like an add-on, they could be your ride-along buddy. So that like the next time that you cut somebody off, they're like your advocate. So like they're riding along with you. You cut somebody off. That person gets out of the car. What's going on? You don't even have to talk to him. Your ride-along buddy gets out and goes, hey, Don't worry about it. Look, I'm his advocate. He cut me off last week. It's okay. He's not doing it on purpose. Really, if you got to know him, he's such a great guy. You'd really, really like him. This is what happens, though, when we accuse somebody sometimes. We don't really know the backstory. And really, do we need to know the backstory? Because a lot of times we will accuse somebody of something without knowing anything about them. We'll judge them for who knows what reason. A lot of times we become accusers just sort of automatically. And a lot of times, like when we get on somebody for what they do on the road, or maybe in our jobs or wherever, we are guilty of the very same things. But we get all very righteous when somebody does them to us. See, what we do is we begin to believe the worst in people. We're sort of in that culture where we believe the worst instead of believing the best. And what I think happens to us is we get into this sort of mode where it's sort of part of our DNA to kind of go through a checklist in our minds about a person to determine whether we're going to show them any benevolence or any assistance or help them. Let me ask you, would you consider yourself to be more of an accuser or more of an advocate? Which do you think? When you have that dialogue with yourself, and we all do it, we kind of go through this inner evaluation about the person in front of us to decide whether they are deemed worthy of our help. And then oftentimes we will turn away when we think that maybe they have done something wrong or done something bad, or maybe we think they've done something wrong or bad. We say, why would I want to help them? Do you know what they did? See, today we're concluding our series, Not My Circus, Not My Monkeys, which is kind of a clever way of the discussion we've been in over the last 3 weeks about how to get involved in people's lives. How do we do that? Because we know when we read the pages of the Bible and the stories that God tells us is that he encourages us to get involved, but how do we do that? And today we're going to take a kind of a final look at it by looking at how, whether we believe the worst or whether we believe the best, how that determines how we're going to help somebody. And we're going to look at a story in the Bible where this guy named Jesus was squarely in the middle of somebody's circus. And he had a decision to make, and he had some actions to take, and what would he do? Now, what we do know about Jesus, and it's important, and if you've never heard this before, I'm really, really glad you're here, is what we know about Jesus when we read the historical accounts of his life, is that he always stood for the people that nobody stood with. He always advocated for the people that nobody advocated for. And what he teaches us in his perfect way is how we can get in there and engage people no matter what they've done, no matter what we think. Because what he would tell us is, clearly written in the pages of the Bible, is that every single life, every single person is precious. Everybody deserves to be advocated for. That's what we're going to talk about today. Let's pray and we'll get started. God, thanks so much for tonight. Thank you for everybody that could be here. Thanks for giving us a place to come where we can look and we can see what you have to say to us. The question is, accuser or advocate? What does that even mean? How does this story intertwine in my life, and what can I take away from it? And man, if we could take one thing away that enhances somebody's life, that would be great. Help us to do that. We love you, and we pray this in your name. Amen. So we're going to be in this book of the Bible called John, which is located in the New Testament. And first of all, if you don't have an easy-to-read version of the Bible, we would love for you to have one. You can get one at the Get Connected table out in the lobby, and you can go and just take it. Or you can stop and say, hi, we'd love to get to know you. And the reason why we want you to have a copy of the Bible for yourself is because we really want you to read it. Because what we know about the Bible is if God is who he says he is, he inspired the writers of those books in the Bible. They penned the things that God wanted written down, and that is the story of God. It talks about his nature and his love for humanity and how he created us. And when you start to read the Bible, it becomes a little bit like a mirror. You start to see yourself in the pages from the stories of the people just like you or me that are in it. So we want you to have that. And there's some great digital versions of the Bible that you can get at your app store. There's one called YouVersion, which is great. It's packed full of things to help you read the Bible, study the Bible, reading plans that'll even read the Bible to you. And another tool that we have is our very own Forefront app that you can also find at your app store. And we've tried to create this app to make it sort of a one-stop shop for you to engage your faith. Because here's what I know from my life is that when I filter the things that I'm thinking, feeling, and doing through God and what He says, it always comes out better. It isn't always the answer maybe that I want, but it always comes out better. So we built this app with that in mind. So all of the speaking that we do from here is in that app. The supporting weekly studies that we do are also in there. There's a list of the different small groups that we have that meet all over our area each week, which as a side note, we're getting ready to launch about 3 to 4 brand new small groups here in September. If you've never tried a small group before, it is literally one of the best things that we do here. You can ask people that are in this room right now that go to them and lead them. They're amazing. We would love for you to join one of those. And there's also a spot there where you can give, and Jason talked about how important that was. But we want to give you a place to go where you can really engage and really kind of understand, because at the end of the day, what we want to do is we want to understand God a little bit better so that we can walk out of here and become better people. So, like I said, we're going to be in the book of John. And John is one of 4 books that talk about the life of Jesus. If you go to the New Testament, the very first one is Matthew. Right after that, Mark, Luke, and John. And those 4 books talk about the life of Jesus. Now, Matthew, Mark, and Luke are very similar. It's 3 individuals telling the same story about Jesus from his birth through his ministry to the days leading up and his crucifixion. John, while it encompasses many of the same stories as the other 3, has always been my favorite because it's very beautifully written, because it describes Jesus as God. We read in the very first chapter of John how Jesus was with God, has always been, is God, and is now on earth in the flesh to be with us. It's very mysterious and very supernatural, and it can be very hard to get your mind wrapped around that concept. It even is still for me. But even if that's a stretch for you right now, what is true is that John existed, Jesus existed, and the historical accounts are very accurate. So we know this is a good accounting. And John was on the inner circle with Jesus, so he was very close to him. He stayed with him all the way through until Jesus died. So we know that John had a real inside view. There were the 12 disciples, but John was one of the 3 that were the closest. And we're going to be in John chapter 8, and when we arrive in John chapter 8, we see Jesus is an adult. He's in his ministry. He's emerging as the Son of God. He's beginning to elude this idea to the people around him. And he's in the temple where you would expect somebody as wise and learned and godlike as him, and he's teaching. And there's a group of people that are beginning to form around him, and they're sort of angry, and this sort of like uproar is beginning to happen. And just to back up a second, when you look at Jesus and what you may have thought about him if you were around at the time, is you probably fell into 2 distinct groups of people. There were people who absolutely loved and adored Jesus and were very attracted to him and what he was saying at the time. And it's very, very interesting is that most of the people who were attracted to Jesus were very unattractive to the rest of the people. They were secular people. That means they had no religion. They were not in the religious faith of the day. And Jesus came, and he brings this idea of love and caring, and people are drawn to him and they want to learn from him. On the other side is this group of people that were the very strict religious authorities of the day. And they really struggled with Jesus because I think really deep down they had an idea that he was who he says he was, which was God, the Messiah, the Savior, but they never seemed to really want to face it. So the very hardcore religious people of the day hated him. They actually plotted ways and were very successful in getting him killed. And what they would do often is they would try and set him up. They wanted to set him up so that they could sort of unravel him before people's eyes, but they could never do it. Jesus was exactly who he said he was, and the people that hated him, man, they went about their day just trying to figure out how to trip him up. So he's teaching, this group forms, and they have somebody with them. They have a woman who is supposedly caught in adultery. And they're going to drag her before Jesus, and their goal is to get him to condemn her. Now, not only do they want him to condemn her, but they want him to condemn her to death. See, in the ancient law, adultery was a capital offense. It was punishable by death. They were under Roman law at this point, so that was not a capital offense. So what they wanted to do is they wanted to catch Jesus here and see if he would actually condemn her. So we pick this up in John chapter 8. It'll be up here on the screen beginning in verse 2. At dawn he appeared again in the temple courts where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law, the Pharisees, brought in a woman caught in adultery, and they made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now, what do you say?" They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. So there's an angry mob. They're very vitriolic. They're sort of growing. Now, if you were to kind of think about today's culture, which unfortunately over the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of this kind of mob mentality in various different forms. And sometimes when mobs form, people who join on don't really know what's going on, right? So imagine this mob. They're yelling at Jesus. They've disrupted everything in the temple. They've brought this woman before her, and there are people that are kind of glomming onto this. And can you imagine kind of maybe the conversation? Like somebody who comes in late, like, what's going on? I think they said she committed adultery. So I'm like, wow, she did that? Really? That's what they say. Well, she probably needs to pay if that happened. Well, yeah, that's why we're here. Well, fast forward that to today. I don't know, maybe some of you here have been a victim of a bully before. Maybe you've had a number of people that have attacked you verbally or through social media for something that you've done. You see, what happens is I think that we know in our country right now, and for a while now, when people make a mistake, man, we pounce and we accuse and we judge. And sometimes even just the thought that somebody made a mistake, not really sure whether they did, but we pounce and we accuse and we judge. And then we begin to pick up our rocks in the form of our tweets and our texts and our emails or our words. And before you know it, man, there's this angry mob. Some people are yelling things and they don't even really know if there's anything to yell at. They just know everyone else is. Here's the problem, though, for people who follow a loving God. It is anything but loving to walk around with hate and judgment and anger in your heart and in your head. But what happens is when we start to accuse, we excuse our inaction, our words, our vitriol. Here's the thing, if we think about it, and we know this is true, when we believe the worst, criticism always comes first. When we believe the worst in something, criticism always comes first. It's like a barrier. How could anything come through that to help someone else? 1996, Atlanta, Georgia. They're hosting the Olympics. A security guard notices an unattended bag. He clears the area. He calls the authorities. Bomb goes off. Kills a 44-year-old woman, and a Turkish cameraman running to the scene has a heart attack. Richard Jewell is seen as a hero. Think of the people that he saved, clearing them out. But Richard Jewell had been a security guard at a college. And the college, for whatever reason, somebody floated a rumor that he would embellish his incident reports when he was a security guard at the college. He was described as a badge-wearing zealot. The FBI gets a hold of this, and a picture starts to emerge of Richard Jewell. The media grabs onto it. It explodes. The thinking was that maybe he concocted this bomb, cleared everybody out of the way, set it off to elevate himself and make himself look good. Wasn't true. None of it was. Yet he was ruthlessly pursued by the media. In one quote he said, "I felt like a hunted animal, followed constantly, waiting to be killed." He was completely innocent. When you read his biography, he recently died. And when they have talked about how maybe his health was so affected by this ruthless scrutiny in his life. 1998, a 21-year-old White House intern has an inappropriate relationship with the President of the United States. Guilty? Yeah, by her own admission, absolutely. She was absolutely excoriated worldwide. Her reputation completely destroyed, referred to as that woman. It took until 2015 when she was able to really begin to discuss it, and now she's on the cutting edge of advocating against cyberbullying. And she did a TED Talk called The Price of Shame, and in it Monica Lewinsky states, "Public shaming as a blood sport has to stop. In 1998, I was patient zero of losing a personal reputation on a global scale, almost instantaneously. Today, the kind of online public shaming I went through has become constant." Those two people had one thing in common. One was very innocent, one by her own admission, guilty. But the one thing they had in common, it didn't matter. They were ruthlessly shamed by the world and in many, many different forums. Guilty or innocent, it didn't matter. The assumption became that they needed to pay. They had it coming. Really? They had it coming. Have you ever had it coming? Have you ever had that happen to you? How big a price does somebody have to pay for a mistake? Well, let's get back to the story of the woman here with Jesus, and picking it up at the end of verse 6, we read that they were trying to trap him with questions. In verse 6 it says, "But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger." And when you read that, the interpretation is sort of, he became very indifferent to the crowd. I don't know if you've ever had somebody maybe it's one of your kids keep talking at you and you've turned the switch off, you're not hearing anymore. I kind of think that's what he was doing here. But when they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and he said to them, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." So imagine the crowd and the group, the yelling, the questioning, the anger, the tension. And he stands up and he silences all of them. And he spins the mirror around and shows them themselves. You ever screwed up? You ever made a mistake? Now he's God, right? I know what you do. I know what you think. Go ahead. If you're that self-righteous, you go ahead and start throwing stones. Complete silence. Verse 8, he stooped down and wrote on the ground again. At this, those who heard began to go away, one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left with the woman still standing there. When I read this, I cued in on that older ones first line, because I'm a little older. Why did they walk away? Well, older people, generally speaking, might be a little wiser, maybe a little bit more mature, depending on who you talk to. But generally, older people have a little bit more experience. Maybe they got a little bit more baggage. I know that when I look back on my years, there's a few things there I'm not proud of, right? You probably have a few things, maybe, that you're not real pleased about. So when this was brought to their attention, they start to melt away, and then everyone else goes too. Verse 10, he straightened up and he asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" So after he says that and they all peel away, it just ends up Jesus and the woman, quiet, everybody's gone. Has no one condemned you? No one, sir, she said. Then neither do I condemn you, Jesus declared. Go now and leave your life of sin. Mercy is what she got. Mercy is what she needed. Mercy is what we want. If we've ever been told that we don't matter, if we've ever been pushed down, criticized, ruthlessly bullied, we need to know that we matter, and we do in the eyes of God. You do. It's almost like Jesus leans in and he whispers, I love you. You matter. And that's what I would tell you that he says to you in your lowest point. Neither do I. When you walked in, we handed these stones to you. And I really wanted you to have something tangible that you could take with you for this reason. You know, sometimes we get in this accusatory debate in our head about what we're going to think about somebody or what we think about what somebody did. And we can get really angry, and we can begin to not be the best version of ourselves. So when you get ready and to start having that debate and you want to condemn, I want you to pick up this stone and I want you to ask yourself, would Jesus condemn this person that you're thinking of right now? And the answer is no, he wouldn't. Then if you have to say it out loud, neither do I. And when you're down because you're being criticized, or you're trying to walk out your life the best you can, and you've made mistakes and you've made errors, and you don't think that anybody out there gives a crap about you, and all I want to do is make your life miserable, I want you to remember that there is a God who loves you, that kneels down, that whispers to you, I love you, and I would never condemn you, because he wouldn't. And the great thing about this passage at the very end there is it is wonderfully hopeful. Because if you're sitting here and you've ever struggled with the notion of God, where we're living in a world that is so caustic and so accusatory, I'm here to tell you that he's real and that he cares about you and that he loves you, and that's what's the essence of that story. You know, if you've ever been a parent, you know that there is nothing that your child could do that would ever make you love them less. And a good parent tells their kids that. Being a parent is so hard because you can say that, but in your head going, I absolutely hate what you just did, but I love you so much. And that's how God feels about us. There's things that we do that he can't stand, but he will always love us. And here's another thing about what our kids do. Our kids will do something, we'll catch them in it, and it's not the it that they get upset about. It's what will mom and dad think. Okay, I'm in my 50s. I wrecked my mom's car when I was 18. I can still remember the look on her face when I walked in the door. I felt shame that I did something like that. I let her down. Shame is incredibly powerful, and that's what drives us into these isolating moments when we want to get away from everybody because we don't think we're worth anything. That's what shame does. Brene Brown is an actual shame researcher, and she wrote, shame is a powerful master emotion, and she's quoted as saying, a deep sense of love and belonging is an irreducible need of all people. We're biologically, cognitively, physically, and spiritually wired to love, to be loved, and to belong. When those needs are not met, we don't function as we were meant to. We break, we fall apart, we numb, we ache, we hurt others, we get sick. How many of those people that were getting ready to throw rocks were in shame themselves and had no other way of trying to figure out what to do? How many people shame other people but yet would beg for mercy when it happens to them? God knows all of this. And God would tell us shame is not love. It's why he sent Jesus, God in the flesh, who came down here and would never shame. Should there be consequences for our actions? Absolutely. There are laws and authorities and institutions that are like umbrellas that we stand underneath that we know protect and maintain good order in society. But when somebody steps out of that, does not give us the permission to absolutely ruthlessly destroy them in shame. And some of your kids are going through this with these things. This is the brand new bully on the playground right here if you don't know it. I've talked to some of you parents. Your kids are being bullied in this fashion. In John chapter 3:17, we read why he came. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn, but to save the world through him. Here's what we know. Believing the best puts shame to rest. Believing the best puts shame to rest. And when you install this in your life, I want you to keep in mind something. The way you speak and talk and how you handle yourself as an advocate for others, your kids are hearing you. Your coworkers that have no idea what God is about, doesn't want anything to do with it, thinks God is nothing but condemning. You might be the only Jesus that they ever see. They're watching you. They're taking you in. They're listening to you. We get an awesome opportunity to advocate in our actions and our words. People who help other people find and follow Jesus cannot possibly do that with stones in their hands. So the woman, guilty or innocent? We don't really know. And we don't always know with the people in front of us what's going on with them. You have things that you don't want anybody to know about. It wasn't the point. Her guilt or innocence was absolutely not the point. Jesus' mission was not to determine that, and it's not our mission. He didn't come here to condemn. We are not here to condemn. His mission was her self-esteem. Neither do I condemn you. His mission was her new life with God. Go and sin no more. His mission is you and your life and where you are with God as he whispers in your ear and tells you that he loves you and that you matter. When I was listening to Monica Lewinsky's talk, there was one quote that absolutely ripped my heart out. It's when she said, it was easy to forget that woman was dimensional and had a soul. And that is absolutely true for everybody in this room. We are all dimensional. We all have souls, and everybody outside of this room also. Neither do I condemn you. The people that are before us have dimensions, and they have souls, regardless of what they have done. Now, we can never, ever keep God's love from somebody else. It will always be there. But man, we can sure get in the way of them feeling that when we accuse, or we can advocate and we can totally enhance that for them. What this lesson's about is showing mercy. And what mercy falls under the heading is of this wonderful word called grace. Imagine this God of the universe, like we can't even imagine. Let's just pretend we all believe that he is who he says he was. That he came here and he put Jesus on earth to die for everything that you or I ever did. We don't deserve that. That's exactly what grace is. So when we start to think that somebody doesn't deserve something, I want you to think about what Jesus did for you. Hold that stone, because there's some things we know about grace. Grace always cares. Grace always stands in solidarity with somebody, everybody. Grace never takes on a position of superiority. Grace never condemns, but grace always, always conflicts with our self-righteousness, and I pray that it always will. So accuser or advocate? What's it going to be? Are you going to believe the worst, or are you going to believe the best? I want you to ask yourself, when you run into that situation, I want you to pick up the rock. I want you to ask if you could ever see Jesus condemning a person for that. And then I want you to say to yourself, neither do I. And then I want you to enter into the circus with that person, because they need you. So let's go help people. Let's pray.